All right, let's kick things off with Looney Tunes Back in Action from 2003. Warner Brothers, see, they figured they had the perfect recipe after Space Jam knocked it out of the park back in the 90s. Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, the whole gang, teaming up with live-action stars again. What could go wrong, right? Well, the studio poured $80 million into the production, hoping it'd be the start of a whole new Looney Tunes comeback. I mean, they were already mapping out sequels, spin-offs, and even theme park tie-ins. But instead, it bombed spectacularly. The movie only made $68.5 million worldwide, failing to even make back its budget, let alone marketing costs. The failure was so devastating that Warner Brothers completely shut down their feature animation division, which was an entire studio. The film was directed by Joe Dante, the guy behind Gremlins and Small Soldiers, who later said Warner executives kept forcing gags and cameos into the movie to the point that it became more of a corporate product than a comedy. But the tragedy is that Looney Tunes Back in Action was supposed to revive the classic characters for a new generation. But instead, it killed the whole feature animation studio, and the characters stayed off the big screen for nearly 2 decades. Until years later in 2021 with Space Jam: A New Legacy. But guess what happened? That one flopped too. Then there's Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within in 2001. Square Pictures spent a staggering $137 million trying to make the world's first photorealistic CGI movie. They dreamed it would launch them as a Hollywood studio. But instead, it bombed hard, making only $85 million worldwide, which was only about 60% of its production budget. And who knows what they spent on marketing? Anyway, audiences were creeped out by the lifeless faces and stiff animation stuck deep in the uncanny valley. The movie collapsed at the box office, and Square shut down its film division pretty much overnight. Their gaming arm survived thanks to Final Fantasy X, but their Hollywood dreams dead and buried. Another brutal failure was Cutthroat Island in 1995, a pirate adventure starring Gina Davis and directed by Rennie Harlin. Carolco Pictures was already on shaky ground after spending fortunes on Total Recall and Terminator 2, but this movie became the final nail in the coffin. The budget soared to nearly $100 million, yet it earned less than $20 million worldwide. The collapse was so brutal that the studio filed for bankruptcy before the film even hit theaters. The almost $100 million loss was so devastating that the rest of Hollywood took notice. And pretty much everyone avoided pirate movies for almost 10 years after that. It wasn't until Disney took a gamble with Pirates of the Caribbean that the genre was revived. And then, in 2000, Fox tried to challenge Disney and Pixar with Titan AE. But it was an absolute disaster. Critics slammed the plot. Theaters sat half empty, and the losses were staggering. Just 10 days after release, Fox Animation Studios were shut down completely. For Fox executives, it was the final proof that they couldn't compete in a market dominated by Disney and Pixar. So yeah, Titan AE single-handedly ended Fox's hopes of becoming a major player in feature animation. Now going back even further, there's Heaven's Gate. In 1980, Michael Cimino had just snagged Best Picture for The Deer Hunter, so United Artists gave him free rein. But it was sheer chaos. Endless takes, costs ballooning out of control, and a final budget around $44 million, which might not sound like a lot, but a budget of this size was unheard of in the late 70s, early 80s. To put that in context, the first Terminator movie, with all its special effects, only had a $6,400,000 budget in 1984. And despite that ridiculous budget, the film barely scratched $3.5 million back. The disaster, well, it was so severe that United Artists' parent company just pulled out of Hollywood entirely and sold the studio to MGM. Cimino didn't just make a flop. He ended an iconic studio, I mean, this studio had released classics like Rocky, Annie Hall, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Then there's The Golden Compass in 2007. Based on the His Dark Materials novels by Philip Pullman, it had a massive budget of about $180 million. Well, New Line Cinema believed it would be their next Lord of the Rings. But instead, the film was heavily criticized for watering down the more controversial aspects of the book. And it failed to connect with audiences. The audience reception was so bad that Warner Brothers folded New Line into its operations, effectively killing it as an independent studio. For a company that brought us classics like A Nightmare on Elm Street and Seven, it was a tragic, tragic end.